So I'm reacting to the Anti-Asianness Within the Black Community by Charlie Cheon. A lot of racism happens to Asian people, but we usually don't talk about it. And it especially seems that when it comes to talking about racism of black people with other minorities, that's also never talked about as well. So let's take a closer look.
So I already know what some of you are going to say. This is causing racial division. We need solidarity. Not all black people are doing this. Why are you generalizing? White people are racist against Asians too. Why aren't you talking about that? What about the anti-blackness in the Asian community? It's the media that's making it seem like black people are harming Asians more. Yeah, this video is meant for you to hopefully serve as a cold dose of reality. If you count yourself to be an open-minded person, I ask you to listen to what I have to say before jumping on to the comment section. The precise reason why I want to talk about this is because we live in a society where we Asian people can feel free to talk day and night about how white people are racist against us, but are immediately silenced when we try to talk about the anti-Asianness in the black community.
That is true. I think as minorities in America, we're definitely openly allowed to talk about white people and the racism that they may perpetrate against minority groups. But I've noticed that when it comes to certain minority groups, we can't talk about that. I know we hear common phrases that, you know, if you're a minority, you can't be racist to white people because of the power structures and that, you know, reverse racism doesn't exist essentially. But what happens then when it's between other minority groups, right? Between Asians and Latinos, Latinos and black, and in this case, Asians or black people against Asians. You know, a lot of media pushes certain narratives because it sells more, because it's a lot more common and it incites more controversy. But I guess right now, with a lot of attacks that Asians have experienced during COVID, what we saw were a lot of them were African Americans. But that wasn't really reported as much as, let's say, when a white cop kills a black person, right? So let's keep looking.
I was walking down the street from my high school to Walgreens. I was walking with three of my friends from both China and Taiwan. There is a car just rushed through us, driven by an African American, shouting that go back to your home, like go back from where you are from. We're not hurt, it's just shocked and scared of our safety. The point I'm making here is that we should not distinguish people by their race or gender or anything. Black people can be racist. White people, sorry. Oh no. I will get this.
That's wild. She's just sharing her story and saying that, you know, a core principle of racism and how it can come from anyone. And that it doesn't matter if you're black or Latino or Asian, is that if you're racist, you're fucking racist. Did you guys see like that visible reaction from the crowd where they kind of drew support from her, right? She's just speaking facts and saying a message of, you know, racism can come from anyone. But then this black lady steps up and kind of starts silencing her, right? It's interesting that there's kind of like this hierarchy of victimhood that gives you certain privileges when it comes to these types of arenas. It's weird.
Let's start by saying I have very much a problem when a person of any race, white, black, Latino, or otherwise, commit hate crimes against Asian people. It makes my blood boil.
Facts, same.
And let's also start off by saying that when a black person harms an Asian person, that doesn't mean that all black people are certainly responsible for that. Just as in the same vein, when a white person harms an Asian person, that doesn't mean that all white people are responsible for it. You're only responsible for your own acts, nothing else. But then we can't.
It's interesting that personal responsibility has become cast off to the wayside recently. A lot of the times when it comes to victimhood, we blame a lot of external factors, like whether it be, oh, white people are suppressing us, or, you know, because of my skin color, I'm limited to this race. And perhaps there's a lot of validity in that in certain aspects. But a lot of personal responsibility is always left out of the equation too, right? One quote that I've always heard is that, dude, if you have seen people of your own skin color make it, then what's your excuse that you haven't made it too, right? There's successful black people, there's successful Asian people, there's obviously successful white people. Although it might be harder for some groups, it's absolutely possible. And what that person did was use a lot of personal responsibility to be able to get to that situation. We allow these narratives and pine it up to a lot of external factors for why we can't accomplish something. And that's showing its head when it comes to victimhood as well, where we're not allowed to call out certain groups because of their victimhood position. So in this particular instance, a lot of people will probably say that black people have it worse than Asians in America. So in that sense, a black person attacking an Asian shouldn't be talked about as much. But whereas, let's say when a white cop kills a black man, which is completely wrong, that becomes a national headline, that becomes protest, that becomes a whole movement in 2020, right? If we really care about issues, then we need to be consistent no matter what it is. If racism is about ending discrimination based on race, then it needs to be based on race, not just by certain races.
But then we can't just say black people harming Asians are the actions of the few and then end the conversation there. Because of the sheer magnitude of the problem. The near daily attacks, black people cussing Asian people out, punching and spitting and kicking Asian people and killing Asian people, there are dozens to hundreds of these cases every month. Especially in the city of San Francisco, this is happening every day. And if you're saying hundreds, you're exaggerating. This is why I need to make this video. People are not realizing the magnitude of what's going on because the national news media is not broadcasting this fact as incessantly as one might expect if there were hundreds of videos each month of black people getting punched, spat on, and kicked. At the height of the pandemic, they shined a quick and passing light on a number of these videos only because within that concentrated period of time, it became too obvious that this was happening and they could not afford to ignore it without losing the public's trust.
First of all, Charlie is fucking brave, man. And we need more Asian people like this that speak up about facts within our community. For my viewers, I actually made a video called Why Harvard Hates Asians. And I essentially talked about the case that's been launched against Harvard for its alleged discrimination on Asian students and making it harder for them to essentially get in, right? Through that process, I try to interview 3 Harvard students, some alumni, some that are current students, and ask them about, their experiences at Harvard. And initially, some actually agreed to it. But then when it came to push come to shove in the day of the interview, they actually backed out. Look, I don't hold anything against them, but it shows a real story of how a lot of people in our community don't want to speak up. So honestly, props to Charlie, man. That's why he's blowing up.
If you want to see the true scale of what's been going on, I recommend you watch my very first YouTube video I made a year ago. I listed out the black on Asian hate crimes that happened within the span of a month. It's one after another happening day after day. And bear in mind, these are only cases that A, is reported to the police, and B, that the news media picked up on. It's a small subset of a subset.
So another thing I want to talk about too is that, look, my channel's mission is to explore the unfamiliar and look at perspectives from both sides. And of course, with something like this, I'm probably getting a little bit riled up because, there's bias in it. It's of course having to do with racism against my community. What I do want to focus on is the fact that, a lot of people don't even know that these things are going on because it's not being reported on the media. So in this video, what I want to do is try and explore that nuance and that we need to talk about this. We really need to talk about racism. Doesn't matter who it's perpetuated from. And I'm sick of hearing those excuses of, reverse racism doesn't exist. That's such a lazy cop-out to be racist.
In reality, there is a bigger undercurrent of this rampant anti-Asianness that we're talking about. Just within my own circle, I know multiple cases of this happening. They didn't report it to the police and it wasn't picked up by the news.
That's a really good point. I think a lot of Asian people, if a lot of racism has been perpetuated on them, won't even report it in the first place. So out of the attacks that have happened, I still think that knowing my community, it's only a small subset that's getting reported on. Put that in mind.
How many more cases like this are out there? And at what point, after hundreds of these videos, do these cases no longer constitute isolated incidents? So then here's the most important conversation. If this is happening, what do we do about it? As I've said, this doesn't mean that all black people are doing this or that all black people are anti-Asian. But no matter how many times I say that, I found people still go like, oh, why are you generalizing? It's such a disingenuous attempt to deflect from having a conversation about this.
I think, topics like these are important because it raises dialogue, right? With this, I'm not trying to spread hate, and neither is Charlie. He's just trying to point light to the fact that there's inconsistencies that are going on. I've done enough street interviews now where I've heard a lot of these common phrases, right? A question that I like to ask in a lot of these topics that I cover is, does questioning you make you racist? Does questioning this topic make you sexist? Because a lot of the times, a lot of people just say those words, racist, transphobic, sexist, when they don't have an argument, right? Because a lot of people aren't thinking with nuance. A lot of people are just regurgitating whatever they read on Twitter because it's the popular opinion at the time. But of course, right, the facts are always changing. And especially in today's time where the definitions of a lot of these issues are changing, it's really hard to keep up with the dialogue. So for a lot of people, they're just reading the first thing that they see, what the popular opinion is that doesn't get them canceled. There's a reason why, this video also did very well. This got 500K views within a month. It's not just Asian people that watch this. Other people are noticing this trend too, but haven't been able to articulate it into words just like how Charlie has been able to. Cancel culture has been running rampant and getting more extreme over the last 5 to 10 years, but a lot of people are craving authenticity. A lot of people are craving nuance. That's why I believe so hard in my mission. We need to have more nuanced conversations if we want a more united country, in my opinion.
And the conversation should go like this. We can all agree that when a black person commits an anti-Asian act or an Asian person commits an anti-black act, that doesn't mean that the entire communities are responsible for their actions. But to the extent that we're having group level conversations, for example, about the anti-blackness within the Asian community, so too do we need to have group level conversations about the anti-Asianness in the black community. And the reason why this continues to happen is because we're not doing that. I'm talking about public discussions. I've kept up with these conversations. I've seen our Asian community so-called leaders have conversations with black community leaders on TV about race relations and talk over and over again about the anti-blackness within the Asian community.
Yeah, that's also that was so revealing during those COVID attacks against Asian people, man. China Mac was the only mainstream like Asian celebrity that truly advocated for those attacks that black people had on Asians. And he held dialogue with the black community as well. Whereas a lot of these mainstream fucking Asian celebrities just cucked themselves and just started talking about whenever an attack of a black person happened on an Asian person, talking about how the Asian community is racist towards the black community. Just fucking
Amazingly, I've seen mainstream news channels do special segments about Stop Asian Hate and mention within these segments the anti-blackness within the Asian community without saying one word about the anti-Asianness in the black community.
Imagine that shit. Imagine the BLM leaders that are black start talking about how there's also racism against, black people against white people. Imagine bringing it up in that context after one of your community members was strangled to death by a police officer. Only fucking Asians in America will do that, man. Where they'll just cuck themselves and honestly just save face and make statements like that and talk about anti-blackness in the Asian community after an older Asian person just got murdered by a black person. Imagine that shit.
On the segment that's supposed to be about our issues, our Asian leaders having conversations, doing public speeches, and on social media call out the anti-blackness within our own, which is the right thing to do, but they stay silent as hundreds of videos emerge of black people brutalizing Asians. I've been to Stop Asian Hate rallies and have seen again our so-called leaders denounce on stage the anti-blackness within our community and talk about how white supremacy is dividing us all, and not a single word on the anti-Asianness within the black community.
See, that's also another thing too, is that a lot of these groups, whenever it comes to minority on minority violence, they start blaming white people like they're even in the equation. What does white supremacy have to do with a black person attacking Asian people? If we're really gonna, practice what we preach, then we also need to call out the bad shit that's happening within our community too. Because yes, of course there's anti-blackness within the Asian community. But why is the other side not talking about that very fact that's happening on both sides? We need to be able to bring out the truth from both sides. And that starts from looking inwards and being brutally honest about yourself.
With the only exception of Sean King, I've seen Asian people be demonized for talking about anti-Asianness in the black community on social media and in real life, while when black people talk about their anti-blackness within the Asian community, everyone nods along as a matter of course. And if you're wondering why all of that is going on, because it wouldn't seem to make sense, right? Why this disparate treatment? The mainstream narrative is that even if it's not a white person harming Asians, it's still white supremacy, because white supremacy pits communities of color against one another. And so even if black people harm Asians, white supremacy is to blame.
All right, so I'm going to end it there. But, like you said in the beginning of the video, what we're ignoring a lot of the times is personal responsibility. It's ridiculous to say that all black people hate Asians or all Asian people hate black people or that white supremacy is making racial communities fight amongst one another. But at the end of the day, we need to consider the personal responsibility that we have in our actions and how that might reflect in the group as well. And just like how groups need to start looking inwards and calling out the bullshit that's happening within their community, whether it be amongst themselves or to other communities, we need to also look inwards in our personal actions. What are we doing when we're protesting equality, but then, doing something completely hypocritical in private? If we're going to preach very loudly, we also need to practice what we preach very loudly too. If you want to see more reaction videos or also check out my main channel, then you can click right here.